Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at today's The Hindu newspaper, analyze the articles for relevance in the prelims as well as the mains examination. Also, take a look at the practice answer writing for the mains question and a couple of PIB outtakes as well. So, first of all, today we are going to cover around 12 different topics, and most of them are associated with the US Iran deal, first of all. So we will take them together. So when we talk about the three of the articles, in fact, the US Iran deal has dominated the editorial section. You have five different articles which have appeared for them. But again, most of them, it is a reiteration of each other's point of view. So that is why we have not considered all the five of them. We have considered the three of them. Moving from war to deal in a deeply divided region, the US Iran peace deal confronts the spoiler Israel, the long term implications of US Iran deal. So, this is going to be relevant for your GS paper too. We are going to have some extracts out of it so that the from all the various articles, what is it that we can actually extract? Most of the articles today as well, yesterday as well, and tomorrow as well will be conveying the similar kind of messaging associated with the US Iran deal. But you need to have a concise understanding of what that indicates. Prime to treat. Now, this is an editorial article which talks about the Nipah virus problem in Kerala, why frequently this problem emerges in Kerala. And what is it that Kerala story in this case is a success story? And what can the country in its entirety learn from Kerala's experience for Nipah virus? Relevant for your GS paper 3. Now, again, because of what we are seeing in the case of Trinamool Congress, earlier you had the situation with the Rajya Sabha MPs in Aam Aadmi Party. You have an emerging situation as we speak in the case of Shiv Sena. So that again brings to light the 10 schedule provisions in terms of the mergers of the various different political parties. So that is something relevant for your GS paper too. Then after that, five solutions Indian cities need to stop fighting for water year after year. Now, this is basically the one of the articles which is always important for your examination for GS paper 1 as well as for GS paper 3. So, this is relevant for your GS paper 1. Not binary. Now, this is an article which has appeared in the science section, and that talks about the fact that it is not a kind of a binary decision that you conserve forest or you take care of poverty. You can tackle both of them together. So, this is relevant for GS paper 2 and GS paper 3. Okay. Now, Indian Ocean Rim Association examining Canada's request to be observer. So, what is this association and where the headquarters are situated and what are the prime agenda? Air Force to participate in exercise Pitch Black, where it is held. Grapes 3 is also mentioned in the science page. What is that Grapes 3 associated with? Where in India is it situated? Now, after that, uh, Kishau multipurpose project. Now that Kishau multipurpose project, where is it located? Now, Home Minister had a meeting regarding the stakeholders of the Kishau multipurpose project. That is something which has appeared in the portion of PIB. And Japan joint credit mechanism when it comes to carbon credit and the carbon trade. So these are the various different articles that we are going to consider. Now, for everyone interested in preparation and improving your overall understanding of geography, we have started the series of geography through maps every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 p.m. These are free sessions available to everyone. You can attend these sessions and you can improve your map work, you can improve your map pointing, and you can ensure that some of the aspects, such as what are fjords, what are glacial erosion, which are the productive areas, how the population density is distributed, and so on, that is something that you can target. You can scan the QR code and get the link to enroll for the class. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 p.m. You can join these sessions. Now, starting with the first article of the day, moving from war to deal in a deeply divided region. This is an article relevant for your GS paper too. Now, when we talk about the US Iran deal, before we talk about it, yes, the mapping sessions are free. Now, in 2001, when US invaded Afghanistan, US came in with all the major battle gear, with modern equipments, modern aircrafts, and massive bombs. At that point of time, Taliban had issued a statement that you might have the watches, but I have or we have the time. Indicating what? That US might have all the fancy gear that the world can provide, but the Taliban had time. They could wait it out. And eventually we saw that spanning in the region of Afghanistan. US had to leave and the Taliban came back. Same thing happened in the case of Vietnam and the US experience in Vietnam earlier as well in the last century. This time, the same thing has unraveled in Iran. US came in along with Israel with all pomp and show and basically wanted to have a regime change in Iran. Now, Iran is not a country like Iraq, is not a smaller region like Syria, where overnight you can have a regime change. They have been preparing for this battle for a long period of time. And Iran put the spanner in the works and the designs of US by imposing a blockade on Strait of Hormuz. Now, in the deal that US and Iran, they have digitally signed that deal. Now, in that deal, basically, one of the conditions is reopening the Strait of Hormuz. But the Strait of Hormuz was never closed prior to this war. One of the aspects is basically unlocking the sanctioned assets of Iran to the tune of $100 billion. Now, that is where the US Iran war, US has actually signed a retreat. And as Henry Kissinger famously said, that a guerrilla wins a war by not losing. So Iran, in fact, has by that logic won the war by not losing in this war, and US was not able to meet its objectives. But our role here as or our overall aim as candidates for civil services has to be to understand the intricacies, the implications, and the overall aspects of this particular deal. Now, first of all, when we talk about the deal, it is a kind of a strategic compromise between the nations. Now, why do I say so? And what are the aspects of this so called deal? So, first of all, Iran keeps the Strait of Hormuz open. One can argue it was always open before. Hostilities across multiple fronts, including Lebanon, will be halted. This is where US and Israel are not seeing eye to eye. Israel is saying that Lebanon is one of the hostile territories being used by Hezbollah. Hezbollah is being backed by Iran. So we cannot, under any circumstance, stop the offensive in Lebanon. But US has asked Israel to put a hard stop. Iranian assets are unfrozen and sanctions eased worth around $100 billion. There are also conversations about US basically paying Iran some amount of money for reconstruction. Now, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, just a few hours ago, he basically denied these claims, but nonetheless, the Iranian media has been making these claims since last night. Iran commits to limits on their activity. Now, mind you, above three was basically a creation of the present war, which started from 28th of February. The last one was already something which was agreed long time back under the leadership of Barack Obama. That was the JCPOA, right? Now, this was a kind of a joint committee, right? So, joint comprehensive plan of action, which was signed between Iran and P5 plus one countries. P5 plus one, as in the five countries of the Security Council plus Germany. All of them, they basically had the interest not to allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. Now, this is where it was one of the most forward looking treaties arrived way back in 2015. And this is where The outcomes of this treaty, first of all, was limitations or limits to nuclear enrichment, whereby Iran agreed that basically various facilities like the Arak facility where enrichment could be carried out, that would be halted so that Iran would not be able to develop a bomb, right? Nuclear bomb. So that was agreed upon. Now, to ensure that Iran is adhering to those particular norms, that is where they also agreed for nuclear inspection. Nuclear inspection. In fact, the US at that point of time had claimed that under the JCPOA, Iran has agreed to the most intrusive type of nuclear inspection in its facilities that no other country has ever agreed to. Countries like India, etc., they maintain a kind of limitation in terms of what are the facilities that you can inspect. Only the civilian facilities you can inspect. But under the JCPOA, US had argued that Iran had opened up entirely for inspection. Then the third aspect of this JCPOA was basically of sanction on Iran, right? Economic sanctions on Iran. Now think about it. JCPOA, which was signed in 2015, agreed by the P5 plus 1 nations, had this kind of an outcome. In 2026, the war launched by US and Israel, if you take a look at the outcome of it, this is the outcome. So isn't it one and the same? So what changed? Mr. Trump happened to the world, and he has been a gift which keeps on giving. So basically, when Mr. Trump came at that point of time in 2018, the US, led by the Israeli liaison and the entire the Israeli backing at that point of time, US simply chose to walk out of this JCP. US simply walked out of it and said, we are not going to respect. Now that meant that Iran got this inkling that US is going to launch a war on us. So they started developing the weapon system. They have the missile development. They had huge amount of underground facilities which developed, and it was all being nudged by Israel from behind. So that is where the article argues, and in general, the argument revolving around the global media for the past couple of days has been that US is back to the condition of 2015, barring the expenditure of hundreds of billions of dollars, the loss of face, and an emboldened China. Now, what has the war indicated? That military approach has got a kind of a limitation. Whether you see it in Ukraine, whether you see it in Gaza, whether you see it in Sudan, any place across the world, military interventions have a limitation. Eventually, if you want to reach a lasting peace, you have to rely upon what? Diplomacy as well as the political intervention. Even now, Israel is hell bent on continuing with the military offensive. But then the US is pulling it back, and US is asking for a kind of an intervention in terms of political aspect and diplomacy. That is when the solution has been reached. The cost of war is very high. This is not an era, the Prime Minister had famously said, this is not the era of war. But having said that, this is not an era where you can keep on fighting wars endlessly, because a war in Middle East impacted the people from Canada to Australia. So you can imagine that how everything in the world is now interconnected. The commodity prices go up, the fuel prices go up. There is inflationary trend in regions of Europe. Due to that inflationary trends, the government subsidies have to increase. As a consequence of these inflationary trends, many of the service sector like restaurants, etc., they have to fire individuals. That creates job losses, unemployment burden increases. So think about it, an offensive in Iran in the Persian Gulf can impact a person in Africa, South America, North America, Asia, and we have seen the case in India. India was one of the most impacted countries. not only in terms of our energy reliance, our larger diaspora, the population which lives in the Gulf, the case of when we talk about even the normal trade, right? Transit, everything in India, fertilizer. Now, this is an year where farmers, anyways, are going to expect lesser amount of rainfall. So, all these areas are interlinked to one region, and that is where the cost of war is very high. And that is why the global pressure was also absolutely very high to stop this war. Now, what have been the key outcomes of this? First of all, the deal is still very fragile. Israel at any point of time can rupture this deal because one of the aspects of the deal is cessation of all the hostilities, even in Lebanon. Israel is saying, whatever region we have occupied to the south of the blue line, we will keep that region because Hezbollah is operating from that region and Hezbollah will cause us harm. So that is where the deal is still very fragile. Iran has emerged much stronger. And believe it or not, within a few days, the narrative will start coming out of Iran that even though Iran has faced massive losses in terms of billions of dollars, lives have been lost, properties have been lost, losses have been huge. But Iran will always say that we have survived means we have won. And in the larger Islamic world, that is what the article argues, that Iran has now got the opportunity to emerge as the champions of the cause of Palestinians. After all, they have defied Israel. And they will say, they have the argument to say that this is why we were the only ones who stood up. So, this is basically the phase where Iran will be much stronger. Iran knows that if push comes to shove, I can always block the Gulf of the Strait of Hormuz and the world will come around. So, this has basically been a vindication of the Iranian strategy and the threats. The Gulf has been divided. Now, when we talk about countries like UAE, they have exited the OPEC, right? So, earlier, what used to be the Saudi dominance in terms of the OPEC nations and in terms of the Gulf nations, that has been broken. The Gulf is fragmented, more fragmented than ever before. Now, it will have two implications. First of all, it will lead them to increasingly rely upon US for military support, right? Because they have lost a lot. Now, this war also indicated that amongst the Gulf, now because they have so much amount of money from the Saudis to the region of Qatar, to the region of Kuwait, UAE, Emiratis, all of them have substantially increased their kind of defense purchase. They have state of the art machinery, right? It is like going on a shopping spree and buying every good things which are out there in the market. They have the best of all the equipment. But then when the time came, at that point of time, the willingness to fight was not there in majority of the cases because the aspect or the argument was that it is not our war. So this indicated a kind of the paper tiger. Paper tiger. This has been used as a terminology by the print. So paper tiger defense of the Gulf, approach of the Gulf. Okay. So this will further embolden the Gulf nations to look for multilateral defense agreements. UAE has had a defense agreement with India. Saudis have had a defense agreement with Pakistan. So all of them will start hedging their bets. So that is where the Gulf will be more divided than ever before. Emboldened China and Russia. Now, this is where China basically now sitting back without a blink of an eye did see the weakening of the US far away, and China didn't have to do much of it other than simply sharing the satellite info, the defense info. Now, China knows what to expect if it tries something like this on Taiwan, and China will be better prepared. Russia, which was expecting huge pressure from the Trump administration, for its war on Ukraine. Now, Russia has been out of limelight. What US has done has actually put Russia in a very comfortable position right now. Prominent Pakistan. Now, whether we Indians like it or not, but Pakistan has emerged as one of the key players in this region in terms of mediating the deal. And that is where it is inevitable that many of the Gulf nations will try to improve their relations with Pakistan. Now, should we care about it? The answer is no. Why? Because we tend to benefit, or we end up benefiting hugely with the end of this war. Mind you, our economy was facing severe crisis. Our farm sector was facing crisis. Our energy sector was facing crisis. So the remittances were facing crisis. So the uptake of, or the kind of the advantages that India faces are huge, right? So that is why Pakistan will benefit in the short run. But we, as a growing economy, we need a kind of an era of peace where global trade is on the rise. Now, implications for India: multi alignment will be on the rise, need for energy security. Now, the entire world has been highlighted the importance of energy security. That why should we go for energy diversification? That is what India has been doing, getting energy resources from the Atlantic, from Norway, from US, from Russia. Diversification is important. And another aspect which has been highlighted, what we have done right now, for example, in terms of the rationalization of tax on the government bonds, all of this that India did was in order to bolster the economic growth in the light of the crisis. We need to continue the momentum under normal conditions as well. We should not have an economic reform based upon external stimuli, but as a continuing momentum. For example, last year, we did the economic reforms, but on the back of US tariffs. This year, we did some economic reforms, but on the back of the Gulf War. So we should continue this regardless of the external crises. That is the learning and implication for India. Now, the US Iran peace deal confronts the spoiler Israel. Now, this article basically argues that Israel has always been a spoiler in terms of the long term lasting peace in the region of the Middle East. And basically, it uh, is in not in Israel's interest to look at a stable region. Why? Because if the region becomes very stable, then the attention will go to Israeli action in the region of the Gaza Strip. That is why Israel has been using its entire, in a way, lobbying services in US, the part of the committees that it is in US, in order to lobby the Congress, in order to lobby the Republicans to launch an offensive as frequently as possible in the region of the Middle East. They also tend to benefit from the US defense industry when they have a known enemy in the face of Iran. Now, once that goes away, then their defense progress, their overall progress, or their overall benefit that they draw from US, that will be limited. That is what the article argues, that is why Israel can always offer a kind of a uh, barrier in terms of the peace. And in fact, Mr. Trump, in some of his interviews, has uh, said about Netanyahu that he is an effing idiot. He has used the full terms, not effing. So he's an effing idiot. He doesn't know what to do and when to do. In fact, Israel is where the government faces election later this year in the month of October. Now, Netanyahu and the conservative and his conservative party, now they basically stood for a stronger Israel, national security as the agenda, and that is why they are not ready to back down from Lebanon, because that was their overall claim. The party's claim, the ministers were claiming that we will capture Lebanon as well, we will capture the entire region. Now, Mr. Netanyahu right now faces one of the biggest political opposition right now. Mind you, he has been the prime minister on and off for almost 17 years now. His political survival was dependent on this war. So it is highly unlikely that Mr. Netanyahu suddenly gives up the entire ambitions and lays quiet. So that is what the article argues, that Israel can basically always hamper this progress of a deal. Now, a permanent agreement between US, Iran, etc., that could contribute to regional stability, reduce military tensions, and lower risk of escalation when it comes to West Asia. That is the outcome. But as per the article, Israel doesn't want. The reason being because of the fear of Iran's reintegration. If Iran is reintegrated into the main aspect or the main diplomacy, then the entire, see, when you talk about the case of uniting someone, always better to unite when you have a common enemy. When that enemy is taken out of the window, that unity becomes fragile, right? Any case at the level of the classroom, at the level of the family, at the level of the society, even at the level of international diplomacy. So that is where Iran was always painted as a devil in the room. So if Iran is reintegrated, it doesn't work for Israel. Mind you, they have a long history of espionage. In 1980s, in 1980s, you had Iraq. Now, this is the region of Iraq, if you can look at the background image, and you had Iran. Iraq had attacked Iran in the 1980s. You had the entire war from 80s to 87 across the border of Iraq, Iran, and also across the city. At that point of time, believe it or not, Israel, Israel supported Iran in a clandestine manner. How? Israel basically provided them endless number of spare parts for the American jets that the Iranians had, which were no longer functional, so that the Iranians could fly those F-4 jets again. Israel basically conducted the test for the weapons that Iran could use. Israel provided them with important data at that point of time. Sayeret Matkal, one of the elite forces of Israel, was actively deployed in weakening the Iraqi forces. And what did Israel get in return? Iran provided them with oil. Now, this continued in the 80s. From that, completely reverting to forming Iran as the main villain in the region. So that is where the Israels, and why did Israel do this, by the way, during the 80s? Because at that point of time, Iraq was also very belligerent in the region. And Israel did not want multiple enemies in the area. It wanted an era of peace so that it can grow, it can develop. So that is why what Israel did, it was happy that two of the big neighbors, they are quarreling amongst each other. I will benefit. In the meanwhile, Israel also facilitated the excuse me, facilitated the immigration of the Persian Jews from Iran to Israel. So from that phase of the 80s to the present particular past couple of decades, Israel has always liked Iran as the major villain. So complete reversal is not to be expected. Then the Iran threat benefited Israel in terms of the defense industry quite substantially, right? Defense industry. And that had multiple implications in terms of the economic aspect as well. Now, if let's suppose the Iran factor goes out of the room, nobody talks about the danger from it. Then the Israeli actions in the region of Palestine, in the region of Gaza, that will be the focus and the center of attention. And that is something which Israel would not, as per the article. That is why it is in Israel's interest to continue this offensive as long as possible. And mind you, Mr. Trump himself publicly claimed that if I had not been there, Netanyahu would have been in jail due to the corruption charges that he faces. So that is the where basically, anyways, Israel has lost a lot of global capital of goodwill because of its offense offensive actions in the region of Palestine. Now, if you take a look at the timeline, initially the offensive actions in Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Iran, almost every country in the region has been impacted. Now, whether it will be halted or not, it is for us to see. But the best bets are Israel will continue some actions in the region of Lebanon for the sake of continuity. Now, then the third article for the same aspect, the long-term implications of the US-Iran deal, same objective, similar kind of outcomes. Now, the major challenges that this deal actually possesses. First, the US sanctions on Iran. Now, that is not long lasting. Now, the sanctions are basically a wide ranging set of sanctions. Now, whether all the sanctions can be removed immediately, whether certain conditions are prefixed or not, that is something which we have to see. Release of frozen Iranian assets, estimated to be over $100 billion. Future of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. Will Iran completely give up the program? Now, Iranians say no, the US says yes. So that is where some somewhere in the middle lies the truth. So if Iran reinvigorates that or restarts that, then you can imagine the restarting of the hostilities. Security arrangement in Lebanon and the wider region. Now, Iran has got a lot of control. Now, the control has reduced over the passage of time, but has always exerted a lot of control in the region. From Houthis, who basically exerted pressure in the Bab al Mandeb Strait because of the control in Yemen, to the Hezbollah controlling the region of Lebanon, to the Iraqi militia. Iran basically had a lot of non state actors controlling the region. So, any of those actors at any point of time can still derail the peace. Iran's assertion of sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, that can have a long-lasting challenge as well. Now, limitations of US. The war, the deal has indicated severe limitations of US. We are in the post-Pax Americana world. We are not in the world anymore where the world would basically uh, uh, dance with the US tune. No. Earlier, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, US military was so powerful it could exert control anywhere. But the peak of that power was seen in the 90s and the 2000s. Now, in this war, Iran with simple missile and satellite tech which was borrowed from China, missile tech for which it had worked for a long period of time, basically ensured that the cost of war will be much great on US because it is far away from its shores. So limitations of US in terms of military has been huge. Also, in terms of alliances, that has been a limitation. Because from the region of the Gulf to NATO, one phrase which has become very prominent is not our war. That this is not a war that you started after having consulted us. So why should we help? For example, UAE, Kuwait, all of them, they experienced attack from Iran just because they were hosting the US military bases. So there is already an ongoing conversation amongst these nations that why should we have the US bases? After all, the US bases didn't help us at the time of need. So if we have to develop our own defense, why to host these bases? Qatar experienced some of the largest amount of destruction in the oil field, and Qatar was actually negotiating with Iran on the sidelines a no attack peace deal. So that is where the limitations of US have been exposed. For the global energy markets, the countries will now necessarily expand the strategic petroleum reserves that they hold. From India to Japan, South Korea, China, every nation has felt the requirement and the need for the strategic petroleum reserves. They are about to expand that. That is where you have the Indo UAE deal, India UAE deal, okay, for the strategic petroleum reserves as well. Energy diversification strategies. not only in terms of the sources of energy, but also types of energy. For example, China had bet big on coal gasification. We are working on development of syngas and production of syngas for almost 6 years. Now the conversation has been going on, but now there has been some galvanization and some production initiatives which have been carried out. Alternative transport routes for the global energy market. For example, remember we had talked about the case of the Indo Oman pipeline, right? Pipeline. So that is where the global energy markets are set for a complete reset. Okay. Now, then moving away from US Iran, because I'm sure tomorrow also we'll talk about this. Moving away from US Iran deal, now coming to the other articles relevant for your examination. This is primed to treat. This is basically the Kerala story, the Kerala success story. This is relevant for your GS paper 3. This is about the Nipah virus. Now, Nipah virus, time and time again, you have had the outbreak which is experienced in the region of Kerala. And one of the good aspects of Kerala has been that the screening, the monitoring, and the reporting has been so prompt that immediately it is detected, the patients are isolated, and as much as possible, treatment is provided. This tells you about the strengthened grassroots level medical intervention which is there in the state of Kerala. And that is where a leaf can be taken out of it and can be implemented in many of the states of the country which have a very abysmally poor condition of healthcare across the country. So there is a lot to learn from Kerala. But before that, there is something to learn about the Nipah virus as well. So, what is this Nipah virus and how does it spread? So, this virus, the WHO considers it to be very, very serious. Now, this virus primarily spreads from the fruit bats, right? Infected fruit bats. Now, what happens is that these fruit bats who have this virus, now they can infect one of the fruits or through their blood, urine, saliva, that can then be transmitted to other animals like pigs, or overall through the palm saps, the case of the fruit, and eventually it gets transmitted to human. And then human to human spread can also happen. Fatality rate is massive, 40 to 75% higher than even the COVID pandemic, right? So it will lead to brain swelling, encephalitis, headache, sore throat, respiratory issues, dizziness, seizures, drowsiness. All of them are associated. Now, WHO considers the Nipah virus threat as seriously as possible. The reason being that the fatality rate is one of the highest, not the highest, but one of the highest, right? Human to human transmission potential is also high, and there is a risk of this ever emerging pandemic. So that is why Nipah virus is considered serious. Having said that, now why does this happen? Why do we face this of the outbreak of the Nipah virus? The reason being that in majority of the areas, when we talk about the forest, that is where in the forest, in the caves, etc., the bats are present. Now, they have always been present. But due to increased urbanization and spread of the human habitations, people have started encroaching into these. As a result of that, oftentimes you have those zones where some of the bats will also come and the human interaction also happens. Earlier, that used to be distinctly dividable, but now it is intermixed. As a consequence of that, now we are more prone to consuming the contaminated fruit, the contaminated palm sap from the palm trees, etc. So that is why human encroachment into forest ecosystem, habitat disturbance of the fruit bats, the cutting down of the trees, the destruction of the forest caves, increased human wildlife interaction. That is why this becomes common. Now, what to learn from this Kerala story? Human encroachment is bad. Maintaining the sanctity of forest is required. Other than that, we also basically need a kind of the surveillance system, the screening system, and the healthcare intervention that Kerala provides. Okay? Then, what does the 10th schedule provide on party? Now, 20 rebel Trinamool Congress MPs, they have met the Lok Sabha Speaker and announced the merger with the Nationalist Citizens Party of India. Prior to that, you basically had the members of Aam Aadmi Party in Rajya Sabha announcing the merger. Prior to that, you also had the case where the legislators of Bahujan Samaj Party in Rajasthan announced the merger with the Congress, and so on. So these mergers, as we speak, there is an ongoing crisis in the Uddhav Balasaheb Thackeray faction of Shiv Sena because of majority of the legislators or majority of the parliamentarians, they are planning a move to merge with the Eknath Shinde led faction of Shiv Sena. So there is a kind of this is, you can say, an era, a season of increased political mobility. Now, this is something which was on the rise post 1967, in the early part, post independence. In the early decades, you had one party which dominated, and that is why you never had this political mobility. But post 1967 through the 70s, you had so much switching between the political parties that the entire political class felt the need for an anti law. None of them had such a majority to implement that, to bring that to the table, because some of the arguments presented by some of the political members were also that this represents a political and a democratic free will. If today my thoughts, my opinions don't align with this political party, I should have the freedom to move to another political party. This is a democratic free will. But then the argument against this principle was that, look, when you are elected as a legislator or a parliament, you are elected because of the party that you represent, at least partly because of that, because the ideology that you represent. So when you choose to switch sides, you are betraying the public mandate, and that is why you should be disqualified. That is where in 1985 you had the 10 schedule. The 10 schedule was brought in basically with the 52nd Amendment Act 1985. So the context, Shiv Sena split in Maharashtra, NCP is split in 2023, the Congress MLAs, Aam Aadmi Party, and so on. All of them have kept on happening. Now, the 52nd Amendment Act 1985, the anti defection law, it inserted the 10th schedule into the constitution. Now, it laid the grounds for disqualification of the legislators. A legislator would be disqualified. This becomes important for your prelims as well, for your mains as well. Okay. Now, a legislator would be disqualified if voluntary giving up membership, right? Now, conduct indicating disloyalty could also amount to defection. Voting against the party whip which is issued in the house, if the party has said that everybody has to be present and has to vote in a certain manner for an issue, if you defy that, it is almost tantamount to defection and ground for disqualification. Independent members disqualified if they join a political party, if any independent member joins a political party after election. And for nominated members, they are allowed 6 months to join a party. Joining after 6 months attracted. Now, the initial 52nd Amendment Act, now they provided certain exceptions. The exceptions under paragraph 3 and paragraph 4, they were the exceptions which were provided to the original 10 schedule. Now, what was this paragraph 3? Paragraph 3 later on was removed. As per the 91st. 1st. 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 This is basically the split exception. It protected the legislators if one third members they formed a separate faction. If in a party, one third members they formed a separate faction, then you are exempt from disqualification. Recognized internal divisions within the legislative parties as well. Problem with this that gathering this one third was easy, and that is why defections could be engineered. It also led to development of various factions in the political parties, and that is something which was never seen as a healthy development. But nonetheless, paragraph 4, the merger exception, provides protection when two-third legislators agree to merge with another party and still continues after the constitutional reform. So this is still in existence. Paragraph 3 has been removed. Paragraph 3 has been removed by the 91st Amendment 2003. So why was paragraph 3 removed? There were recommendations earlier by the Dinesh Goswami committee, by the Law Commission as well. But paragraph 3 was removed because the understanding was that creation of this factionalism, weakening of the legislative party, it weakens the parliamentary democracy, the multi party democracy that we have. Because a party is larger than the legislative party. A party represents the ideology, the cadre, the members. Now, one small microcosm of that is the people who are elected to the legislature or the parliament. So those people who are elected to the legislature or the parliament, they cannot hold the entire political party to ransom. That was the thought. And that is why the parliament intentionally moved away from legitimizing internal fractures. Okay. It restored the primacy to the political party rather than the legislative party. Why? Because if the political party survives, that is when the parliamentary democracy will be much better. So that is why the paragraph 3 had been removed. Okay. This is what you need to know in the present context about the 10th schedule anti-defection law. Right? 52nd Amendment. What are the grounds for disqualification? What are the exceptions? Paragraph 3 has been removed. However, one key question that keeps on arising every time that these political defections keep on happening and which has led to frequent litigations. You have multiple cases pending before the courts, right? What is the key question? Can two-thirds of legislators merge themselves into another party without the original party formally merging? That is, let's suppose I consider the larger political party Trinamool Congress, right? Now, if let's suppose I have the ruling coalition, so if now TMC will have the legislators also, legislators, right? Now, two-thirds of them, can they merge without the agreement of the original party merge? Can that happen? Now, there depends on the interpretation. It is so vague, that is why frequent litigations keep on happening. So, if you go for strict interpretation, only a merger of the original political party qualifies under paragraph 4. And the lawyers have also cited this in front of the advocates, have also cited this in front of the Supreme Court that look, paragraph 3 has been deleted, but you cannot read paragraph 4 only in isolation. You have to read it along with the spirit represented by paragraph 3. And what was the spirit represented by paragraph 3? That the political party also has got a primacy when it comes to deciding the future course of action. So that is basically where legislature members alone cannot engineer a merger as per the paragraph 4. However, what is the practical implement? Two-thirds of legislators can claim merger protection even without a formal party merger that we have seen. So that is why we keep on circling back to the same issue. Within a couple of days, whatever is the condition of, let's suppose, the Uddhav Balasaheb Thackeray Shiv Sena faction, we will again come back to the same. So, what is the outcome? What is the solution? What is the solution out of it? Yes, Aam Aadmi Party, India, it happened with Aam Aadmi Party. Right now, it is happening with Trinamool Congress. It is also happening in Maharashtra right now. So, these are the prevalent issues. So, what is the solution? First of all, we need to have an established law commission which would provide its recommendation. The article argues that we should have a panel of retired judges, of retired Supreme Court judges to intervene. Right. Then, law commission recommendation should be followed. Law commission recommendation has to be followed. Okay. That has to be followed. So, these are some of the, and also the Supreme Court, when it provides a judgment in these cases, it has to be very explicit, right? So that is where it has to set a kind of an example so that the sanctity of political democracy in our country that is maintained. Because mind you, once the voter perception develops that regardless of whosoever I vote to power, everyone is one and the same. Eventually, they can switch from A to B, B to A to C, C to D. Then the trust in the voting process and the electoral outcome tends to decline. That is never good for a vibrant democracy. So that is why what was the spirit of the 91st Amendment? That spirit needs to be upheld, and that is where the Supreme Court also needs to take a stance. Okay? Now, 5 solutions Indian cities need to stop fighting for water week after week. We are in the midst of the summer season. Over the past few months, you have come across multiple news stories that how India is the epicenter of the heat waves which are caused. Majority of the cities are experiencing these heat wave conditions, etc. Now, almost all the cities of the country, from Bangalore to Hyderabad to the Chennai to the regions like Chennai, Delhi, NCR, Kolkata, every place has been facing water scarcity. And mind you, it is not only the issue of the quantity of water which is available, it is also about the quality. And this is one thing that UPSC has been asking again and again. So that is where you should be aware about this. So here, what is the issue of quantity versus quality? So first of all, during the summer season, the overall availability of water reduces. As the water availability reduces, there is an increased role of the tanker mafia. Okay, the tanker mafia. Now, this tanker mafia, first of all, one of the problems is takes huge amount of money for provision of water. So for the poor population, it goes out of reach almost, right? So for the poor, out of reach. Now, this is one of the problem. Other problem is the water that they provide. Now, that is not always of the best quality, but you don't have an option, so you take that water, right? Now, think about it. I always give this example. Consider the city of Bangalore. Bangalore, for the past few years, has always been facing water scarcity during these months. Now, in Bangalore, you have people like Mr. Narayan Murthy, Mr. Nikhil Kamath, who also live, and you have the poorer population also which live. Now, in the time of water scarcity, do you think there will be water shortage crisis that Mr. Murthy will face or Mr. Kamath will face? No. They will have the best of the equipments, filtration, distillation system. They will get purer water. But the poorer population, they are basically exposed to poorer quality. As a consequence of that, what happens? Not only are they paying their daily income, the disposable income, which means their ability to spend in other aspects like healthcare and consumer goods, that will end up declining. On the other hand, they also expose them to various different diseases like jaundice, typhoid, right? And that can have a heavy toll on the poorer section of the population. So that is basically where the impact is manifold. Now, the cities have themselves to blame. Why? Because rapid urbanization, what it has done, has outpaced the growth of the water infrastructure. Cities have expanded beyond the capacity of the existing water system. So the traditional water bodies, such as the lakes, the ponds, the underground water reservoirs, everything has been encroached upon and has been emptied. For example, consider the city of Bangalore here. Now, in this case, Bangalore at one point of time had more than 200 to 300 lakes. Presently, it has got two, right? And that too, one of them is impacted by the industrial pollution. So that is where the city's ability to sustain water for the citizens, that is reducing. And we have seen the problem with the quantity versus quality. So what should be the solution? What should be the outcome of it? First of all, transparent emergency water planning. This every city should do, right? Every city should do that. That in the case or in the times of scarcity, how do you manage, or what is your plan to procure water? From where? Right? And this, if the citizens also have a clearer picture, they know where they will get the water. They won't panic to pay larger sums to the illegal tanker mafia. Now, then we have to reduce the water losses. Every city, through the pipeline, through the drainage system, there is incredible amount of leakage. In certain areas, the leakage is to the tune of 25 to 30%. That much amount of leakage of water happens in the city before the supply. So think about it. Just the periodic maintenance, regular inspection, etc., that can reduce the amount of water which is lost due to leakage factors. Then manage demand efficiently, first of all. And in this part of water losses as well, do you have enough tracking system by the city, by the municipality to know where the water is going? You don't have enough water meters, the smart meters. That needs to be installed, right? So that that water leakage from the various different parts, that does not happen, right? So one pipeline, 50 different connections have taken place. Only one is legal. Rest 49 are illegal. So quality of water produced is or received is also low. Then manage demand efficiently during the peak and the non-peak cycles. Peak and non-peak cycle. Okay, during that period of time. Then protect water quality during shortages. That is where regular inspections, heavy penalty on the tanker mafia. Okay, understanding. So, but in most of the cases, there is a political, social connection also. There is a nexus as well. So that needs to be stopped. And thereby, the penalty, the levying of charges from this mafia, that needs to be done. Reuse and recycle of the wastewater for landscaping purposes, for gardening purposes, for beautification purposes, for sanitation purposes, that needs to be done. The city which is not able to reuse and recycle its own water will always be water starved, regardless of the condition. Other than that, the aspects that you guys have mentioned, sponge cities, the case of natural rainwater harvesting, this can also be brought into implementation. What are the other measures which can be used for water conservation and water security by the cities like Hyderabad and Bangalore? Let us know in the comment section below. Now, the practice question. Water shortage in urban areas is a human problem and not an environmental problem. Elucidate with probable solution. This is a 10-marker question. Now, here in the intro, what do you write? In the intro, you basically provide the information that when we talk about the crisis, fresh water supply is very limited. Our country has got less than around 4% of the available fresh water across the globe and a population of 18% across the globe. So that is where the mismatch is huge. Majority of the population resides in the urban or the urban fringes, in terms of not majority but large number of population lives in the rural urban fringes and the peri-urban areas. As a consequence, they don't have the proper supply. But having said that, so in the intro and the first part of body, you have to describe the problem. Describe the problem of water scarcity. Okay? Issue of water scarcity. That is where, unless and until you describe the issue, how will you say that this issue is created by what factors? So you describe the issue, right? Fresh water is less, population is more, many urban areas, peri-urban areas, rural urban fringes, there the population is extremely restricted. Then comes the portion of the main body that it is a human problem. What do you have to write in this? You have to write this portion. That is rapid urbanization, traditional water bodies, groundwater over extraction. Those have created the water scarcity. Encroachment upon lakes, ponds, give the example of Bangalore, give the example of Hyderabad. That is going to be the example areas. Okay, the reasons you have to cite here. Then, probable solution. Then you provide the solutions, the 5 to 6 to 7 solutions that we have talked about, the five of them. Other than that, sponge cities, other than that, rainwater harvesting, you talk about them. Then you come to the conclusion. As India aims to reach the goal of Viksit Bharat by 2047, access to clean drinking water supply is not only a right but also a goal of sustainable development that India cannot ignore. This is important for the utilization of the human capital and also reduction of the diseases. So, like that, you can basically conclude. Okay. Now, then in the science section, you basically have groundwater storage. See, the groundwater extraction is difficult. Groundwater extraction is difficult. That is where in peninsular part of India, you have so much of extraction which has already been done in the region around Bangalore Plateau, etc., that the groundwater has been exhausted. Does not mean you cannot have groundwater. That is why you need more lakes and ponds, so that between the layers of the rocks also there are a lot of aquifers. So one igneous rock layer, another igneous rock layer, you will have an aquifer in between. That needs to be recharged. Okay. Now, not binary. India can save its forest by winning the war on poverty. Now, you see, ever since the Rio summit of 1992, there has been a discussion on conservation of forest. In fact, India passed the Conservation of Forests Act way back, Forest Conservation Act way back in 1980. Original act was passed in 1927, but we came up with the Forest Conservation Act in 1980, National Forest Policy of 1988. We have been serious about conservation of forest. Now, based upon certain reports which the article has talked about, it has been found out that forests with higher proportion of poor households and greater dependence of fuel wood have lower tree species diversity. Tree species diversity means that within a forest, how many different types of trees are present. Poverty is one of the major factors associated with the declining results of the forest. And this is something which the Johannesburg summit in 2002 associated with United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change At that point of time itself, in the Johannesburg summit, it was, which later on paved the way for framing of the Sustainable Development Goal movement as well. It was agreed that social inequality, economic poverty, as long as these are present in the society, you will never be able to conserve biodiversity. The reason being that the population which is poor, now they are heavily dependent on the forest resources for fuel, wood, fodder, timber, daily subsistence needs, even on the animals for food. And as a consequence, conservation of biodiversity is not very ideally done. Now, in a country like India, you have 275 million people who are living in the forested region. We never faced this crisis. For example, Botswana, Zimbabwe, now they have been thinking of killing the elephants in order to fight the issue of droughts and famines. India has never been a country like that. Why? Because we have always followed a model of coexistence rather than a fortress model. What is the difference between the model of coexistence and the fortress model? Fortress model is that if you want to conserve a forest, don't allow anyone to enter into that forest. Convert that forest into a fortress. No access to human activities. Humans have no access to the forest products. Then you conserve a forest. This is a very westernized idea of conservation of species. That is what the United Nations basically disagreed with this. And in the 1971, it basically set up the Man and Biosphere Program. That coexistence is important, right? So when we have a larger population who is allowed to coexist, they gain some aspect from the forest products. They are the minor produce. That is something that they get. This is also something which is governed by the PESA Act, if you are aware or if you are able to remind yourself of that. The PESA Act, the Forest Rights Act, it empowers the population to use those forest products in order to ensure their upliftment and also in order to ensure that the forest conservation, they are a stakeholder in the forest conservation. They are not the outsiders. There has been successful examples in Ladakh, in Maharashtra, even in Arunachal Pradesh. So you basically have in the region of Ladakh the snow leopard conservancies, livestock insurance, and homestay initiatives that have reduced the human wildlife conflict. Even in the case of Maldhari tribe, you would have read about the Maldhari tribe. They are well known for coexisting with the Gir lions. Now, it is not as if the Gir lions they don't consume their cattle. They do, but there is a kind of an insurance which is provided. They get the compensation, and they know the importance of lions in the, and that is why the coexistence is achieved. So when you want to have the coexistence, you need to provide this kind of a livestock insurance. Maharashtra mangrove co-management supports fisheries, ecotourism, pisciculture, conservation, even in Arunachal Pradesh. The hornbill nest adoption programs that transformed the hunters into the protectors of the. So that is something which can be implemented in other parts of the country as well. So it is not a binary that you have to choose. Both of them can coexist. Now, some of the articles very quickly for your prelims perspective. The Indian Ocean Rim Association is being examined. So, Canada's application to be an observer of the IORA is being examined. Okay. Now, Canada is a maritime power, and right now, everyone across the world is seeking to diversify their supply chains, partnership, etc., and so on. Mind you, on the sidelines of G7, uh, Mr. Carney and Mr. Modi again had a meeting where they agreed upon the need for fast tracking this relationship. So it is on the rise. But having said that, for your prelims, you need to be aware about IORA. So, what is IORA? It has got 6 areas of cooperation. So it is the Intergovernmental Forum of 23 member states of the Indian Ocean region and 12 dialogue partners bordering the region of Indian Ocean, including Asian countries, African countries, and oceanic countries as well. Headquartered where? Eben in Mauritius. Okay. And what are the key priority areas? Trade and investment, maritime safety and security, blue economy, fisheries management, disaster risk management, tourism and cultural exchanges, as well as issues such as women's development, economic empowerment, etc. That is a cross connect issue. So these are the key priority areas. Many of the times in the prelims, if a statement is framed that one of the key priorities of Indian Ocean Rim Association is ensuring women's economic empowerment, as a candidate, you tend to think that no, it is for maritime security, trade, fisheries, etc. It cannot be women empowerment. These are the exceptional points and the exception areas that you keep in mind for better scoring in the prelims. Okay. Now, Air Force to take part in exercise Pitch Black. This is Royal Australian Air Force's multilateral exercise, that is exercise Pitch Black. It is very coveted across the world. It is a combat exercise to be held in Australia from July 20, and you will have various different countries of the region across the globe which will be participating into this. So, Pitch Black associated with an Air Force exercise of the Royal Australian Air Force. Okay. Grapes 3, a cosmic ray tracker present in Uti. Now, Uti is where you have lot of these radio telescopes as well, right? So that is where researchers from Mumbai and Japan, they have used the Grapes 3 telescope to track the muon activities, right? And to basically understand how the Earth's upper atmosphere is basically reacting to the solar winds and the solar charged particles. Mind you, Earth has got a magnetosphere on its own, right? And despite that, in the region of ionosphere, the charged particles from the sun, they interact. Sometimes they produce auroras, otherwise they facilitate radio communication. So they produce muons as a result of it. So what is this grapes 3 that is relevant for your examination? It is the gamma ray astronomy PV energies phase 3, a major astroparticle physics observatory in India operated by TIFR. TIFR in Uti also operates the radio telescopes designed to study high energy cosmic rays and atmospheric phenomena using array of particle detectors. Okay. Then couple of articles for your PIB. Now here, under the chairmanship of Home Minister Amit Shah, the states, they had a kind of a dispute regarding the Kishau multipurpose project. Now, what is this Kishau multipurpose project? So this is being constructed across river Tons. Okay, river Tons. Now, river Tons is a tributary of which river? River Yamuna, right? And basically, at the border between Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, that is where you have this Kishau multipurpose dam project, which is being constructed. 90% of the cost of water component will be borne by the central government, 10% by six participating states. Okay, which are the six participating states in this? You have Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, and Rajasthan, because they will gain out of the water supplied. Then India and Japan adopt rules for implementation of joint crediting mechanism under Article 6.2 of Paris Agreement. In 2025 prelims, UPSC had asked a direct question about what does Article 6 of Paris Agreement talk about. So Article 6 of Paris Agreement deals with the carbon market, right? So here, the rule of implementation for joint credit mechanism, right? What is that joint credit mechanism? It is under the entire market mechanism for the carbon credits which is being provided. And the purpose of that is in order to ensure carbon credits for any kind of investment, any kind of uh, activity, financial, technical assistance in terms of the renewable projects, sustainable projects, etc., which is done. Okay. Collaboration on mitigation activities that deliver greenhouse gas emission reduction or removal while delivering sustainable outcomes in India and contributing to the NDCs of both the. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion has been helpful. If you have liked the discussion, do let us know in the comment section and don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. We meet again tomorrow. Till then, take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.